Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I wanted to talk about some interesting short stories, or one short story that I read recently. It is about family differences and generational differences and maybe even some colorism here and there. I am referring to Everyday Use by Alice Walker. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling a lot of people might know who Alice Walker is, but for those who don't, Alice Walker is a writer and social activist who is still alive and who is mostly known for writing The Color Purple, which is regarded as one of the best pieces of literature of the 20th century, and maybe one of the best pieces of Black literature that's ever been written. I don't want to say definitively, but that's what I've heard when people talk about The Color Purple. I haven't read it, but I would like to read it in the future, perhaps. Alice Walker also engages in some activism here and there in the Israel-Palestine conflict and advocating for transgender individuals and whatnot sometimes. And she also writes nonfiction as well as fiction and poetry. So pretty fascinating. Unfortunately, I did learn that Alice Walker might be a pretty heavy anti-Semite, as she has done a lot of unusual things, such as praising authors who write about anti-Semitic theories and refusing to publish The Color Purple in Hebrew. And you could say this is part of her sort of protest of Israel as it pertains to their treatment of Palestine. But if you're promoting anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how the world is run by shape-shifting Jews, that's different than supporting Palestine. So it's very unfortunate that she turns out to be someone like this. I probably wouldn't have read this short story if I had known this going in, but I guess we all have to learn this kind of thing at one point, I guess, or another. So very interesting. Also, I had the fortune of attending a Holocaust speech, sort of like a Holocaust Center for Humanity Zoom conference sort of thing, where Alice Walker's daughter Rebecca spoke at, which I think is interesting that Rebecca is a supporter of fighting anti-Semitism, whereas her mother might be anti-Semitic itself. But that's beyond the scope of this video. But I did appreciate what Rebecca Walker had to say. Now, without further ado, let's talk about Everyday Use. I will, go through the summary, do a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. So Everyday Use focuses on an unnamed Black mother at home with their young daughter, Maggie. Maggie has burns from a fire that took place 12 years ago, which has left her skin with a number of scars. And as the story starts, the Black mother is imagining a sort of TV reunion with her other daughter, Dee. And she notes that, whereas most TV reunions are positive, this one might be a bit negative, like this imagined TV reunion where the family fights, although she does try to be the perfect mother for her daughter, Dee. And you see the frustrations and the pride that she has with Dee, how Dee is very focused on education and has made a good life for herself. But at the same time, it seems like Dee is embarrassed about where she's come from. And it might seem like she doesn't like her daughter or her sister Maggie so much. And so there's a lot of, again, pride and frustration, and that extends to Maggie too, where the mom seems to love Maggie, but also recoils in the sort of shy and reserved nature of that daughter. Near the middle of the story, Dee finally shows up with her husband, who is either part of the Muslim Brotherhood or he is just converted to Islam. I don't know the specific part. Alice Walker didn't make it clear, but you saw that a lot in the 1960s and 1970s, where Black individuals would convert to the Islam for any number of reasons, but it was seen as a liberation of sorts. But Dee is clearly ashamed of her past and her family, where it seems like she doesn't want her husband to know that this is where she comes from. And she's also encouraging her mom to sell a bunch of the family stuff, even though it's priceless and means a lot. It might be given to Maggie instead. At one point in the story, Dee asks for some priceless quilts that come from her grandmother, and that the mom was actually going to save for Maggie. But Dee is insistent that she get these quilts rather than the machine-made ones. Either she plans on selling them or just wants them as a sort of status thing to have some element of this past that she really seems embarrassed about in the first place. But the mom is very insistent, even though Maggie's like, okay, give it to her, she can have them. Dee ends up leaving unhappy and tells her mom and her sister that they should make some changes because they don't have to live like this and that times have changed. But Maggie and her mom just eat some snuff, put snuff in their lips, however you use snuff, and they relax until it's time to go to bed. And that's where the story ends, on that sort of peaceful note there. In terms of analysis, there is a bit to talk about with this story. It does seem a little bit cerebral in terms of it being mainly focused in the mom's mind and how she's feeling and what's going on for her. Not so much plot focused, because not a lot happens in this specific story. But I do think it's one of those stories that you could take apart and analyze piece by piece. Just one specific thing that I noticed is when the mom is talking about being the perfect mother on TV for Dee in this imagined scenario she's created, she does say that Dee wanted her skin to be like a barley pancake. And I looked this up, and it does seem like it's dark but light too. So I think that's a bit of colorism. How the mom might be black, like very black. I don't know how to describe this. Like her skin is very dark, and it's a sense of colorism in the Black community where people favor light-skinned Black individuals over dark-skinned Black individuals. Perhaps I'm not the best person to be, talking about this sort of thing. But this is based on the other readings that I've done in the past. And I do think it's interesting that she does say like a barley pancake, like through that tiny line, you get an understanding of maybe the colorism that is prevalent in this family, even if Alice Walker doesn't say it directly. This story, Alice Walker does talk a lot about troubled family relationships, which seems to be the main centerpiece of this story. The mom loves her children in this story, Dee and Maggie, but she is very frustrated with her children. For one, she seems like repulsed by her daughter, because she's shy, reserved, kind of envious of Dee, and the burns on her skin, the way her mom describes it, sounds like she's kind of disgusted in some ways by her own daughter. Like the writing seems to indicate that. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you from this. Have you ever seen a lame animal, perhaps a dog, run over by some careless person rich enough to own a car, sidle up to someone who is ignorant enough to be kind to him? That is the way my Maggie walks. She has been like this, chin on chest, eyes on ground, feet in shuffle, ever since that fire that burned the other house to the ground. And you really get an understanding of kind of her mindset about how she views her daughter. Sure, she might love Maggie, but what kind of person describes her daughter as like a lame animal walking up being very shy like that? There has to be some unspoken sort of frustration, unspoken anger or repulsiveness, like just not liking what your daughter has become, that it plagues this family's relationship, not only with Maggie, but also with Dee, because despite the fact that she loves Dee and praises her, possibly more than Maggie, you see that like the frustrations are there because she doesn't like that Dee is unhappy with the past that she's come from, kind of embarrassed. Like the mom is very proud of what she comes back or where she comes from, but Dee is in what I think a great description, too smart for her own good. And the mom even seems frustrated with that because she doesn't like that Dee seems to be looking down at Maggie and her because Dee loves to read, and as the mom says in the story, like she's cursing Dee, or like Dee is cursing them with knowledge that they didn't ask for whenever she tries to read to them. So you see the frustrations building up there. I like how Alice Walker does that. Not directly saying that this mom doesn't like her children that much, but showing the tensions that have been built up over time. And again, in that quote that I was talking about earlier, you can see the small, like piece by piece, how you can take apart this entire story and discuss like what she's feeling. And this applies to Maggie and Dee too. Like they appear to be just as frustrated with their mom and with each other as like the mom is with them, because Maggie seems a little bit upset with the fact that Dee wants the quilts at the end of the story, but she doesn't know how to express that because she's shy. And like she as the mom notes, like Maggie is envious of Dee, and Dee views Maggie as very simple. Coming from, she even calls her backward at time, like, oh, like Maggie wouldn't want these quilts, all she's going to do is use them, which is a very unusual way to refer to your own sister. But there's a lot of frustration, and other times it's very overt, sometimes it's very under the surface, but I love how Alice Walker writes about it in that way. And then another element of the story is the generational differences that take place between the mom and her children. The mom is from the Jim Crow era. At one point in the story, she says, that her elementary school shut down when she was in second grade, and she didn't ask questions. Nobody asked questions because, as she said, black people didn't ask questions back then. And Dee comes more from this civil rights era in the 1960s and the 1970s, where she's changing her name, doesn't want to identify with her oppressor anymore, and like she changed. I just said like she changes her name. She tries to change it from like Dee to this sort of Muslim type of name. Or Islamic kind of name. And even though the mom points out that like this wasn't given to her by her oppressors, it's a family name that might extend even back to Africa, I don't think Dee believes that. And it really shows like the tension between the different generations, how they have different philosophies, where one is to just, be complacent because the system is way against you, and the other one is to fight the system however possible in order to distance yourself from the oppressor and possibly gain your rights back. Dee sees her mom as complacent and simple. She even says, simple at the end of the story. She says some pretty harsh things. I don't think her mom and Maggie necessarily take offense to it. They might have dealt with this from Dee their entire life, but it is still a pretty harsh thing to say to your mother and your sister, like that they're simple and that they're not doing enough to fight this system because they've existed in this system for a while. Like, yes, change is needed, but fighting your family on this, you're focusing on the wrong enemy here. If you fix the system, if you fight the people who are actually causing the trouble, then what her mom and what Maggie are doing will no longer be, viewed as simple, because they're just living their life as best they can, and the real oppressors are the people with power, which Dee might not recognize this early in whatever social activism that she's doing. So I do think it's interesting how Alice Walker touches upon these ideas without directly saying who is right here, but clearly illustrating that, it's Dee's philosophy is putting a lot of strain on the overall relationships in this family. I do think that there's possibly a lot more for me to parse from this story in terms of what Alice Walker is completely getting at. A large part of it, I think, has to do with relationships in Black families. You might see some of this happening in white families or families from other cultures, but I think in order to truly understand this story, you have to be from that culture to understand the ideas and the generational differences that were happening, in the 1900s that Alice Walker is getting at. I don't quite understand that because I wasn't born into that system, but I do think it would help, if you also had some knowledge from that area. Not saying it's bad, but it's just you need some additional knowledge to really gain the most from this. Anyway, those were my thoughts on Everyday Use by Alice Walker. A really good short story. One of those that I'm probably going to be thinking about for quite some time because there's so much to think about. And, I'm sure after I'm done making this video, there's going to be something that just comes to me and I'm like, wow, I should have talked about that. But, I didn't think about it until, days later. That happens with quite a few short stories that I can think of, like Little Miss Sophie, for example, which I talked about a few weeks ago. So I definitely recommend that you go check this one out. It's available in Harper's Magazine. If you read it once, you can get it for free, but if you revisit it, you need a subscription for it. If you read this story before, you simply want to comment on something I've said here, do so below. Let's have a discussion about Everyday Use and Alice Walker. And until then, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this story if they don't already know, or even about Alice Walker if they don't know her already. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and generational differency type of travels. Farewell.